It's been 8 years since I packed my 2 suitcases from South Africa and decided to come and start a new life in Europe. And one of the common questions I always get is what it feels like to live abroad. But no one really asks me what it has cost me. And so on this video, I want to share a little bit of the silent sacrifices that I've had to make in order to forge a new life in a new country, in a new continent, away from family, away from everything that I've ever known. And so I thought that this conversation could be interesting for people who just want to know what it feels like, or people who are contemplating starting a new life in a new country, who are contemplating making changes in their life geographically. And I think this is an important reflection to make because there really is a lot that is at stake when you decide to move. So let's get into it. Hi, I'm Katie, and this is Candid with Katie. And on this channel, I share my experience as an African living in the diaspora. Okay, so I'm currently living in Sweden, but before I lived in Sweden, I spent about 4.5 years in Germany, and that's the first European country that I had ever moved to. That was my first international trip, and that was the trip that changed my entire life. I want to give a little bit of context on how I ended up moving to Germany. It was November of 2017. I had just recently graduated from my bachelor's degree the previous year, so around December of 2016 I'd finished my degree, and then earlier in 2017 I started my honors degree at the same university where I was in the Free State. And I then decided to leave that, and I went and I got a job. And while I was working, my brother told me that there's an opportunity to go and pursue a master's in Germany. And I had always wanted to move abroad. I always had this desire of living in Europe. I don't know. I guess it's all the stories that my grandmother used to tell me about her travels out here. And I always knew, I didn't know how because of my socioeconomic status, but I just knew that at some point I'd be able to live in Europe. And so when my brother told me about the opportunity, the master's opportunity, I was like, this is really written in the stars. And of course I applied and I got the scholarship, and that's how I ended up moving to Germany. So I got a full scholarship to pursue my master's, and I think, yeah, in November of that year, so 2017, I packed my bags and I bid farewell to my friends and family. And it was really amazing. I think because I was still very young at the point, I didn't feel very emotional about my move. I didn't contemplate too much about it. Also, it was a scholarship. I'd be back in 3 years, and so there was nothing to worry about. I had already not been living home really from the point I was in high school. So for me, it was like, it's just 3 more years. I'm going to explore Europe. This has been a dream of mine. But I didn't really understand that there'd be a lot at stake. There'd be a lot of sacrifices that I'd be doing, especially later on when I would decide that I didn't want to move back home after my studies. So I would say that the moment that I realized that I was missing out on life back home was, I think it was about 2 years into me living in Germany. I had never traveled back home at that point because I thought I'm only going to be here 3 years. I might as well sit and really enjoy the space. I know home, I'll always go back home. So I was there in Germany, but really what hit me, when it really hit me that, oh my God, I'm really missing out on life back home, was when I remember I was on the phone with my sister and my nephew at that point, because when I left, I think she was only a year, or yeah, she had only turned 1. So she was 1 and a couple of months when I left. And so I think she had turned 3 at this point, or 3.5, and we were on the phone with my sister, and I realized that the child didn't know me. Of course, she knew of Auntie KB because her mom would talk about me, and I would also call my sister her mom at this point. But I realized that she didn't know me. And of course, they would send pictures and videos, but I realized that I was missing out on her life. And that's when I really saw that, oh my God, people are growing, people are moving on with their lives. And as much as I have this great opportunity and I'm happy to be here, I'm missing out on all of it. And it's around that same time when my grandmother, which is the person that raised me, then also got a stroke. And I realized that when I left, she was well. She's the one that took me to the airport with my friends and my family. And she had suffered a stroke. And it was really my worst nightmare because I thought she wouldn't make it. And for a period of time, she lost her speech. So even when I called back home, I couldn't really speak to her. But of course, she recovered. But that's when it really hit me that, oh my God, I can't just hop on a flight and go back home just to see family whenever I want to. I was on a scholarship. Of course, student stipends are not enough to be jet setting across the world in any time. So that's when it really hit me that, wow, living so far from home really is a sacrifice. Those are some of the first emotional sacrifices that really, really hit me. After that, there followed a lot of other milestones that I couldn't be a part of. Like when my niece started talking and she started going to school, they would send me pictures of her in her little school uniform, and she was so cute. And I was like, oh my God, she doesn't, like, I've missed out on all of this. I was missing out on weddings. My friends were getting married, and I was feeling really bad that I couldn't be there. And sometimes I would wonder that, am I really a good friend if I can't be there for these big moments in their lives? When they got their jobs, when they got their first apartments, I wasn't there to enjoy it with them, to celebrate with them. Even when my brother got married, it was much later now when I was already living in Sweden. But even then, I had a couple of months prior to that, I had visited home, and so I couldn't make a trip back home for the wedding. And so you just realize that people are really carrying on with their lives, and you're just not a part of it. And even with funerals, late last year, my grandmother that I was just referring to finally passed, and I had planned to only make the visit the next year. And I would always tell her that those were my plans, and she would always tell me, yeah, don't always come home. You spend so much money. And little did we both know that she didn't have much time. And so even her funeral, which was one of those funerals where I felt like I wish I could have made, I wasn't able to make that. Even with other family members, really. So it's really difficult, even when you can't support your other loved ones when they're going through loss. The least of course, you can send flowers, you can be on the phone with them and comfort them, but it's not quite the same. I think another really difficult thing really was for me when I realized that even in decisions or when people need somebody, you're not the first person that comes to mind. When they're planning their weddings or they're planning any functions, you are not part of that conversation because they know you're not going to be able to make it. So you almost start to feel like a figure that is non-existent. It's almost like you become a memory. And it was really difficult for me to realize that. I remember my first visit back home after living in Germany was in 2019. So I was going back home, not because I was visiting, really, it was because I had to go do my practicals. But I would then visit home and spend a little bit of time with family. And I remember when I got there, but I also didn't realize just how much I had changed my lifestyle and just my outlook on life, I guess, or just how I used to do things was starting to become so westernized, I'd say, or the influence of me living in Germany was quite apparent in me at that point. And so I was home and was in my grandmother's house with my other siblings and cousins. And I don't remember what the conversation was about exactly, but it was something to do with the household. And I was like, no, 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 why don't we do this instead? And everybody just looked at me and they were like, this is not Europe. And I was like, what do you mean? So I was like, what do you mean this is not Europe? They're like, we don't do that here. And that would then be almost like a reoccurring phrase I would hear throughout the years when I try and give my opinion on issues. They'd be like, no, this is not Europe. We don't do that here. You're so Europeanized now. You don't relate to what's happening at home anymore. And I'd hear this over and over again. And it really made me sad because I thought, well, I don't relate with what's happening in Europe either. I don't relate with the culture. I don't relate with the customs that side. So what do you mean I also am not relatable to my own people, to my own family? And then you start to feel like you're not a part of any space really. And those are some of the sacrifices that you have to take into account, that you might end up feeling that way, where you don't know where you belong anywhere because you're not European enough. Obviously, you don't even look European. But you're not also, I don't want to say African, like you don't, yes, you look like the people back home, but perhaps how you do, your outlook changes, how you do things changes, and it's seen as though you have othered yourself by assuming these different changes. But the truth is, most of us, or in my case really, you tend to assume all of this because you want to assimilate in this new place that you live now. But even then, that's not enough. And I'm going to get into the sacrifice of just knowledge and language and all of that. But you find that, oh my God, I don't quite belong anywhere, or it doesn't feel like I belong anywhere anymore. Even though you understand why they might feel that way, and you also are aware of the realities of why you don't fully feel like a part of this new society that you've decided to be a part of, you still feel some kind of guilt for not being there for people at home. And it's not that you don't want to be there. You try and show up the ways that you can. For instance, I'll send presents for birthdays when I can. I will try and reach out. But you still feel guilty that you're not there in person, especially with friends. It got to a point where I think I even stopped really talking a lot to my friends in South Africa because I was like, people are, it also felt like people were just like, you're so far away, like we're trying to figure out our stuff here and you're disturbing us, or at least that's how I felt. And I kind of just let some friendships fade away because I just didn't feel like I was contributing anything to their lives anymore, and vice versa. Not because they weren't trying, but I felt like we weren't relating to each other anymore. And that's also something very difficult. I mean, I later rekindled those friendships through communication, and I was very blessed that I have a set of friends that are really great with communication and we can really open up to each other that way. But yeah, it is quite difficult, I can't lie. One other sacrifice is really a sacrifice of identity and belonging. And this one for me is very big. For instance, with language, when I was living in Germany, I was, like I said, I thought I was going to be there for 3 years and I would leave when I was done with my studies. But I really started, especially when I was confronted with the reality that when I was home, I didn't feel like I was part of that society anymore. And I was just like, perhaps let me just try and pursue this new life that I've chosen and see how far it will take me. But also, like I said, because I had already always actually aspired to live in Europe and to really explore what life could be like this side. Also because I somewhat felt like I couldn't fully be myself. I couldn't reach my full potential while I was still living at home in South Africa, which I don't know. A lot of people, every time I say that, and I try not to say that out loud, because a lot of people always side eye me like, what do you mean by that? I don't have perhaps the right vocabulary to put it into words, but I always had this innate feeling that I had to be away from home in order to fully experience myself, to fully understand my potential. And so I just felt like I didn't belong at home. Not really in the same ways in terms of family, what I just spoke about. Of course, that I felt like I belonged, the food, the language, how we used to do things. I felt like I was a part of that. But innately, I just felt as though I couldn't fully express myself fully as a human, not just like physically, but holistically. I felt like I knew that I need to be as far away from home in order for me to realize that. And that, I guess, would end up being the truth. I know I can't really say because I didn't end up living at home, so there's nothing for me to compare it with. But I know that it feels right. And so that's how I'm like, perhaps that's what was supposed to happen. But yes, so when I was living in Germany, I thought I'd be there just for 3 years. And of course, my focus was getting my master's. So most of my time and my energy was put into my studies. We did take German classes, and I really applied myself as far as I could. I was never really someone that was great with languages. Even when I was in South Africa, when I was in primary, I sucked, for instance, at Afrikaans. I still cannot string a sentence of it. So I was never really, I don't think I have a great aptitude for language. But when I was in Germany, I really tried to apply myself, and I really tried, especially at the point where I decided that I didn't want to go back home. I then really tried to put a little bit more effort. But of course, I wasn't able to be fluent as quickly as I would have loved to. But fast forward, I finished then my master's, decided not to go back home, tried to look for a job, but I didn't really want a job because I wanted to carry on with my studies. And that's how I then ended up in Sweden, because I would then move here in June of 2022 to pursue my PhD, which is what I'm currently doing. And the whole issue of language then keeps presenting itself with every move that I make. In Germany was a little bit more difficult because the society there generally, or at least in the parts where I used to live in the east of Germany, they don't want to speak English. So if you can't speak German, well, that's your problem. But because I had created a community around me, there were a community of us students. It's more of a university town, really. You can navigate and live your life there. I'm not saying Germans don't speak English at all. I'm just saying that it's really difficult to navigate yourself in the country and live fully, experience the place if you don't speak the language. And so I kind of experienced the same thing when I then came and moved to Sweden. Sweden was a bit better because I will say people in Sweden are a little bit more open to speaking English. And if you try and speak Swedish and your accent is not good enough or your grammar is not good enough, they just automatically switch to English, which is a different conversation altogether. But I found that it was a little bit more easier. It's still difficult, of course. I am still trying to learn the language, especially because I do love it here and be fully integrated into the society. And I understand that language is a big part of that. But I don't think people understand just how difficult it is to learn a new language as an adult when that is not your only focus. I have my PhD is essentially my job. I get paid to deliver on my research, and that's where most of my energy goes to. And there's also not just that, you're also experiencing other parts of life that might take some time away from perhaps learning the language. And I find that sometimes I will meet other Swedish people who don't understand how I've been here for 3 years and I am still not fluent in Swedish. And some of the people, a lot of the people who have actually traveled outside and lived in other countries understand the difficulty of it and tend to have a little bit more grace. But the people who really have never lived in any other place other than their country of origin tend to think that people are ridiculous for not being able to speak their language fluently, when for these people it's a foreign language, and having to learn a language when you are an adult is not the easiest thing. And as I say, some people just don't have a great aptitude for language. There's other parts of their lives, they're working, they have families, they are navigating being in a new environment, they are dealing with like the losses in their lives and trying to navigate being in this new place, but still longing for home and still wanting to be present for the people that they've left at home. And not to say that they don't understand the importance of integrating in this new place that they've chosen, but I find that there's a lot less grace that is afforded to foreigners in terms of language. And that in itself is a sacrifice, to say I'm going to leave my comfort in order to forge a new life. That is a sacrifice. And you then have to learn language like you're in preschool, you know. That is something, for me, it signifies somebody who is tenacious and brave. And I wish that people like me who decide to step out of their comfort zone and explore what the world has to offer can be afforded a little bit more grace in that area. But we could go forever in terms of language. But just to wrap up, in terms of language, it's a real sacrifice. For example, if you go into the store and you can't express yourself, or you're struggling to find as basic thing as a packet of sugar because you don't know what it looks like or what the correct word is. I think for me, one of the hardest things was a couple of months or a year into me moving to Sweden. I was at the doctor's office, and this doctor in question, English wasn't very good, and I struggled to have a conversation about my health. And I realized that, oh my God, it's the little things like this. If I was home, I wouldn't have to struggle with articulating myself and getting what I feel would be, well, the best care in that sense, because then the doctor would really understand what my ailments were. But so these are some of the things that really come to the surface ever so often. And in terms of belonging, I feel like there's also just parts of myself that, by virtue of just being in a foreign country, I've had to kind of tug away, which I'm like, oh, when I was home, if I was home, I wouldn't have to worry about this. I think the term that I think the term is code switching. So I feel like when I am in like professional spaces, and I think this is something that happens not only if you live in a foreign country, but perhaps even when I was in South Africa, if I was living in South Africa, it would be the same thing, where maybe in the office, I had to present myself in a certain way as opposed to how I would present myself with my family or my friends. But I do feel like living in a foreign country adds an extra layer of that, because it's not only my tone. Now I have to assume a tone that doesn't feel aggressive. And I think, and I know even with my friends and family, like, oh, you're so loud. So every time I'm in the office with colleagues or like in professional spaces, I feel like I'm always listening to my tone to make sure that I'm not being aggressive or I'm not being too loud. And I have to carry myself a certain way. I have to think about the statements that I make, even if I don't agree with what those people are saying. I just don't want to be the angry black girl. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm not gonna interject. I'm not going to have an opinion about everything. I think I let a lot of things slide because I'm just like, is it worth it? Then now I have to explain why that is inappropriate or this or that. Like, I'm just like, there's so much that requires my energy, and you learn to pick your battles in that sense. But it's even with the little things, like with hair. I remember I used to, like, back at home, we wear wigs. You can have your natural hair out in cornrows. You can have it as an afro. You can put wigs. Like, you can be versatile with your hair. And when I moved to Germany, I was still kind of assuming that same vibe. I would have my braids. Sometimes I'd have a wig on, just anything that worked. And for me, it was always a point of convenience. But I remember when when I moved to Sweden, the first day, I had cornrows when we moved here, because I was like, we're moving, it's gonna be stressful, let me just be as natural as possible. So the first day of work, my cornrows weren't looking very good. So I decided, I'm just gonna put a wig on. It was a silky hair wig. And I decided, I'm just gonna wear this so that I look put together. First impressions last. It's gonna be my first day at the office. Let me do that. So I go to the office, I'm wearing my wig. And I could see that my new colleagues were looking at my hair like, is that your hair? I don't know. Maybe it was also an insecurity on my part. They were not even thinking that. But at that point, it hit me that, oh my God, if I was home, I wouldn't even care if my other colleagues could see that it was a wig, because it's so common. Everybody wears wigs, and it's not a huge deal. And I remember when I got home, I told my partner, I'm like, I'm never wearing silky wigs again. From now on, I'm going to rock my whole natural afro looking styles, whether it's braids or an afro. Like, that's going to be my vibe. And then he asked me why. At that point, I never answered him. But I later kind of tried to explain to him that I realized that when I'm wearing this wig with silky hair, it's almost like I'm trying to look like my colleagues that are obviously Caucasian and their hair is naturally that way. I was like, I think it's important that I try and wear my hair as natural as possible, or as naturally looking as possible. For instance, braids, like, it's not my natural hair, but the texture is really close to my natural texture. And so that's kind of the decision that I had made afterwards. But even in that breath, I still haven't been at a point where I wear my natural hair, like as an afro, out to the office. And I don't know why. I wonder if it's because I'm too afraid that they would then really see me in my natural state, and I don't want them to, because maybe they wouldn't see it as professional enough, or it would be a topic of conversation. And I just don't want that, not because I'm ashamed of my hair, because when I'm home, I do wear my natural hair out, because I feel safe and I feel like I don't have to explain myself, and nobody's going to be looking at my hair and maybe interrogating me or giving me weird looks, because I've realized that even around, like, let's say in the staff room, because I change my hair quite a lot. I'll have braids one week and I'll have an afro, like a suit, in the next week. I see how just even when I walk in to go grab a cup of coffee, everybody looks at my hair almost to say, oh, she's changed her hair again. So it's just exhausting. It's just those little exhausting things. And I don't think it comes from a bad place from them. They're probably also just fascinated, because I realize that Caucasian people don't change their hair very often. But it's just those things where you're just like, oh, I'm just so tired of being the topic of conversation. And I know there's going to be people who, like in most other videos, they'll come and be like, if you find it so miserable to live in a foreign country, why don't you go back to where you come from? And I think that's not the point of this video. And if, just as a disclaimer, if that's the energy you're bringing, maybe you shouldn't be on this video to begin with, because I think what the point of this conversation is to just create a safe space so that people who might want to make this move understand what's at stake. Because the point is, most of us end up in foreign countries because we have the skills and the expertise that these different countries need. Not that foreigners are only taking from these countries, they are also contributing. They are taxpayers in these countries as well. So I think it's not a question of, if you're so miserable, why don't you go back home? I think life is a really complex thing, and it's not very black and white, and I appreciate people who see life that way. And so, just as a disclaimer, if you're gonna be mean, just click off the video. Yeah, some of the things that I also worried of is that I would kind of lose my culture and my customs and assimilate too much into this new country, into this new society. And that's something that I always used to worry about. But I think in the past couple of years, I've made a conscious decision to continue Africanizing myself, in the sense that consuming a lot of my culture, and not just like social media that way, but actually reading about cultural practices, understanding spirituality from from a cultural perspective, understanding customs that we used to practice. And I think it's also it speaks to why I always had this innate feeling that perhaps if I moved further from home, I'd be able to unleash my full potential. Because I was just sitting and wondering, I was actually thinking about this a couple of days or a couple of weeks back, that if I was in South Africa, would I still have the same interest about my culture, about my customs, and all of this stuff? If I was still living in the country, I'd probably take it for granted. But now that I'm so far, I'm really intentional about understanding my roots, because if I decide to stay here longer and have a family and have children, it's important that I equip myself with this knowledge so that I pass it down to them. Because even if they would be, let's say, first generation South African Swedish, I want them to still be connected to their roots. So I think it's a very delicate balance that you want to play there. You don't want to feel like you're fighting against this new society. You don't want to feel like you are totally alienating yourself, like you don't want to understand their culture and all of that. You don't want to do that because you live there, you live here after all. But you also don't want to feel like you've totally removed yourself from who you are. So I think it is quite a delicate balance that you need to play there. One of the final sacrifices that I'll share is the sacrifice of stability, career progress, or like stability in that sense. One of the big ones is feeling like you're starting from scratch in terms of your career. I was fortunate enough that this wasn't the case for me, of course, but actually I experienced this a little bit, and I'll explain how. But for the most part, I came here to study. So it's not like I was already working a really great job in South Africa, so I came here and I had to downgrade. That wasn't the case. So for me, it's actually been a positive trajectory. So I'm grateful for that. But I remember when I was in Germany, just after I had finished my master's degree, because of my language skills, I was struggling to find a job at that point. And so I had to work at Amazon, for example. And it was a blue collar job. And I was thinking, if I was in South Africa, I mean, I know there is high unemployment rate in South Africa, but I thought that perhaps my chances would be much better to secure a job that was in line with my qualifications. I could have been wrong, of course, given the climate of unemployment in the country. But it's just a thought that went through my head to think, well, the whole point of me wanting to stay in this new country is because I feel like I have the education and this place is supposed to have a lot more opportunities, but I'm here working a blue collar job. Of course, it didn't last very long because I ended up then moving and getting my PhD, but it's still something that a lot of people have to struggle with. I know some people who were actual medical doctors, and because they don't have the licenses to operate in this country, because they're still learning the language, for example, means that they are also then forced to work in supermarkets, to work other blue collar jobs. And there's no shame in working blue collar jobs. Those are also jobs that contribute to society. But I also understand that if you have spent so much time studying, studying a degree in medicine or in engineering, and you have to now go and work at a grocery store. It's not a very nice feeling. So these are some of the sacrifices that unfortunately you might have to make when moving here. Unless you move here on a job contract that's secured, you might be faced with having to downgrade professionally or in terms of your lifestyle even. And I think another one is just really just how much time it takes to get the basic things that wouldn't be much of a problem, I guess, in your country of origin. Like, for instance, getting a driver's license. It took me so long to get my driver's license, but also in when I was in Germany, because I felt like I was going to leave soon, I just didn't think it was important that I had one. And it was expensive, and some of the driving schools wouldn't take me because my German wasn't good enough. And when I moved to Sweden, I just felt, okay, this whole living like I'm in transit needs to end. And that's also another one in terms of just sustainability, feeling like you have both feet on the ground. You don't feel that way for most, or at least I didn't feel that way most of the time. I remember I was living like I was in transit so much that I could, when I was living in Germany, that I didn't even buy a television because I was like, well, what happens if I decide to move? And you just constantly feeling that. I felt like I couldn't decorate my apartment how I wanted because when I move, is it really worth investing in this? Is it really worth investing in this? In friendships, you're like, should I really start to make new friends, or should I just let it be because I don't know how long I'm going to be here anyway? So it's really it's difficult in that sense. So you really have to think about all of that. But I will say, when I did move to Sweden, I decided, okay, I'm going to be here for a minimum of 4 years, and this whole transit thing has to end. And I will share my experience also with my whole driver's license journey, because this is actually a 1-year anniversary for me having it. So it's probably going to be the next video, something lighthearted. Another one, because when you move to a foreign country, it's almost like you're starting from scratch in terms of learning the language, learning how the system works, how to get your permits, how to get your residence permit, like all of that stuff, learning where to buy electricity if you have to buy electricity. Like, you're essentially a child, you're a baby when you move to a new area or a new country, because you have to learn everything from scratch. So perhaps it means that where you could have been career-wise, maybe if you were still in your country of origin, it means that you might not be there when you then are in this new country. And for me, I saw my friends like finishing their degrees, of course, buying houses, starting families, getting married, all of that. And I was just like, I still feel like a child. So I don't know if I can even afford to do any of that. So it's something to consider. Like, you're going to feel like you're not catching up to your peers because they seem to be settled, because it's home for them, the environment is, they know it, right? And you're still trying to navigate how to order food online because the app doesn't have a translation. You're still trying to figure out how you have to pay your taxes in this new country, and they are buying houses and having babies. So I've learned not to compare myself very much, but in the beginning it really used to worry me, to say, did I make the right choice? Am I falling behind? Am I ever gonna catch up? But I quickly realized that the choice that I've made to start a new life is one that works for me, is one that made me happy, and I will not be able to enjoy it fully if I'm constantly comparing myself to what others' realities are, what others' choices have, what others' choices are. And so for me, it's now just celebrating where I am, how far I've come, and celebrating the little things, like how good I am at now being able to file my taxes on time, I celebrate going to the store and talking to the cashier in Swedish, you know, the little things. And in the same breath, I can still celebrate my friends and family back home when they achieve bigger milestones. But it shouldn't take away from either one of the experiences. I think for me, the biggest takeaway from this video is that moving abroad for me was a choice, and deciding to stay here was also a choice that I constantly make, and it's a choice that I make every single day, even when I am faced with difficulty, maybe feeling lonely, feeling like I'm not quite where I should be when I look around my peers, and just feeling like, am I ever gonna feel like I belong in either one of these places? Am I ever gonna feel like both my feet are on the ground? In the midst of all of that, it's a choice that has made me happy. I'm really happy that I decided to make this choice. I'm living what I feel like is a fulfilled life, and I'll continue to make it fulfilling for myself, no matter the place where I am. And a big part of that has been to be intentional with the lifestyle that I want to live, with my ties back home in terms of understanding my culture and keeping in touch with family as much as possible. And just being present in my life really has really made me happy, and showing up the best way that I can for those that I love, despite the geographical distance, and just being the best version of myself in this new country that I've chosen, doing my job as well as I can, and living a life that is really a good law-abiding citizen. That's just what I've kind of done for myself in order to not feel the sadness of being so away from home. So if anybody asks me, would you do it again? Would you decide to move abroad and live there for as long as you've lived? The answer would be 1,000 times yes. I don't think I would change anything, and I will keep choosing spreading my wings, even though I understand what I might be sacrificing. I don't have the answer as to whether moving abroad is a great decision, especially now that I've shared the sacrifices. But what I do know is that both things can be true. You can still grieve the loss of being away from home, but you can also be happy in your new life. I've made a lot of amazing friends. I've met different people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. So I'm really happy that I made this decision. I was able to see different places, different countries around Europe, and I'm really happy that I was able to get this opportunity. So thumbs up for me, but I do understand that it's not for everybody. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Let me know what your reflections are in the comments. Are you living abroad? Do you enjoy it here? What are some of the sacrifices that you've had to make in order to continue pursuing a life abroad? Do you want to move back home? If you do, why do you want to move back home? Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I really enjoyed giving this reflection. So if you've made it this far, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So please, I'll appreciate the support. See you on the next one. Bye.